The Duggar boys were meticulously raised to be a unified patriarchal army, brainwashed from birth to relentlessly protect the sacred family brand at all costs. They were the Golden Sons, the unbreakable shield of Jim Bob's reality television empire. Yet, in a twist that absolutely no one saw coming, it was Joseph's own brother, Jason Duggar, who took to social media to publicly brand him as evil. Let that sink in for a moment. The ultimate betrayal didn't come from a rebellious sister, a disgruntled former employee, or a secular outsider. It came from strictly inside the house. Jason delivered a massive, unrecoverable PR kill shot to his own flesh and blood, completely shattering the illusion of the perfect Christian brotherhood. He didn't just step out of line, he burned the line to the ground, openly stating that he and his wife Maddie are completely disgusted by Joseph's unthinkable actions. This is the ultimate self-own for the Duggar dynasty, a fatal internal blow from which Jim Bob's carefully curated, decades-old empire can never, ever recover. If you are as absolutely mind-blown by this unprecedented Duggar family civil war as I am, you need to impress that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. We are diving deep into the darkest, most closely guarded secrets of this family, and you do not want to miss a single second of these exclusive theories and insider reports that we are about to unpack. Hit subscribe, turn on those notifications, and let's get into the absolute madness. To truly understand the sheer magnitude of Jason going rogue, we have to travel back to what Jim Bob desperately wants us to remember as the golden era. Growing up in the suffocating spotlight of reality television, the Duggar brothers were flawlessly presented to the world as an inseparable pack of best friends. The cameras lovingly captured them building massive treehouses, working elbow-deep in grease on old cars, and operating as the absolute epitome of wholesome, loyal, unbreakable brotherhood. They were framed as the ultimate antithesis to modern secular youth. They didn't rebel, they conformed. They didn't argue, they obeyed. But behind the perfectly synchronized smiles and the matching polo shirts, a much darker training was taking place. These boys were systematically trained to protect the family's darkest secrets at all costs. Insider reports have long suggested that the Duggar sons were subjected to intense, behind-closed-doors meetings with Jim Bob, where the concept of absolute loyalty was hammered into their developing brains. Exclusive theories floating around the darkest corners of Duggar watchdog groups propose that the boys were essentially conditioned to view the outside world as a hostile enemy, making their brotherhood a literal trauma bond. They were taught that any crack in their united front would invite the devil into their home, and more importantly, destroy their financial livelihood. They were groomed to be the ultimate fixers, the silent soldiers who would look the other way, sweep the dirt under the rug, and smile for the TLC cameras, no matter how toxic the environment became. For years, this false image held strong. The boys were the obedient foot soldiers of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, blindly following the patriarchal mandate that demanded absolute submission to their father and unquestioning defense of their brothers. But nothing built on a foundation of lies can stand forever, and soon, the first cracks in this pristine facade began to show. These were the ignored warnings that Jim Bob arrogantly chose to overlook. While the older sisters, like Jill and Ginger, began bravely breaking away from the cult years ago, publicly distancing themselves and writing explosive tell-all memoirs, the brothers mostly stayed quiet. They remained firmly within the compound's gravitational pull, heavily financially dependent on Jim Bob's sprawling real estate and used car empire. However, you can only suppress human nature for so long. The simmering resentment of being permanently tied to the radioactive, toxic Duggar name has been brewing among the younger, less featured siblings for years. Insider reports claim that behind the scenes, a massive generational divide has been tearing the boys apart. Exclusive theories suggest that while the older brothers who were directly involved in the early scandals felt obligated to maintain the cover-up, the younger brothers, like Jason, who were just children when the first waves of controversy hit, have been quietly suffocating under the weight of sins they did not commit. They have been forced to carry the incredibly heavy, public burden of their older siblings' horrifying actions, smiled at aggressively by the public, yet secretly despised. Imagine being a young man trying to build your own life, your own business, your own family, only to be instantly judged and condemned the second someone hears your last name. The younger brothers have allegedly been staging quiet, untelevised acts of rebellion, demanding financial independence and distancing themselves from the IBLP teachings. But Jim Bob's financial chokehold kept them in line. Until now. The dam finally broke with an event so devastating it became the undeniable catalyst that sparked the ultimate downfall of the Duggar men. The nightmare of the Josh Duggar scandal, a dark cloud the family spent a decade trying to outrun, spectacularly repeated itself. Joseph Duggar, the purportedly quiet, rule-following son, was suddenly and shockingly arrested in March 2026 for a horrifying incident that allegedly took place in Florida back in 2020. The charges were absolutely chilling. According to law enforcement, Joseph is accused of lewd and lascivious behavior involving a minor. The details are stomach-turning. A 14-year-old victim participated in a forensic interview, disclosing that during a family vacation to Panama City Beach, when she was just 9 years old, Joseph allegedly committed unthinkable acts of molestation. The brand was instantly, irreparably destroyed all over again. The younger siblings woke up to a living nightmare, realizing with horrifying clarity that they were about to be dragged through the public mud, the media circus, and the relentless online scrutiny for a heinous crime they had absolutely no part in. The sheer panic must have been suffocating. Insider reports claim that when the news of Joseph's arrest first hit the family group chats, it wasn't met with the usual unified prayers for deliverance. It was met with explosive screaming matches. Exclusive theories suggest that the younger brothers realized that the Duggar name had officially transitioned from a controversial reality TV brand into a synonymous term for systemic abuse. The catalyst had ignited, and the blinders were violently ripped off. They were no longer willing to be collateral damage in Jim Bob's never-ending game of reputation management. Yet, incredibly, the old guard's hubris blinded them to this internal mutiny. Jim Bob, steeped in decades of successful manipulation and cover-ups, fully expected the kids to fall right back into line with the standard, pre-packaged, pray for our family during this season of spiritual warfare narrative. He expected the absolute silence that money and patriarchal fear typically buy. Joseph himself likely sat in his jail cell, awaiting extradition, fully assuming his brothers would quietly and steadfastly support him. After all, they were literally forced to support Josh a decade ago, sitting on awkward television specials and posting carefully worded deflections. Why would this time be any different? Insider reports paint a picture of frantic, closed-door emergency meetings at the Duggar compound, where Jim Bob allegedly laid down the law, demanding absolute radio silence from every single family member. Exclusive theories speculate that he even threatened to completely sever financial ties, cut off inheritances, and revoke access to family-owned properties for anyone who dared to speak out of turn. They thought they had the situation controlled. They thought the old playbook of denial, delay, and forced smiles would miraculously work again. They believed their own propaganda, convinced that the boys' conditioning was too deep to ever be broken. This was the ultimate cover-up mentality, a staggering display of arrogance that vastly underestimated the boiling rage of a brother who had finally had enough. They thought they got away with the emotional lockdown, but they were about to be completely blindsided by a digital explosion that would change the Duggar family history forever. The illusion of absolute control that Jim Bob had so desperately clung to was absolutely obliterated in a matter of seconds. Then came the leak, the nuclear digital explosion that stopped the internet dead in its tracks and officially marked the end of the Duggar empire as we know it. Jason Duggar went completely and unapologetically rogue. He didn't consult the family attorneys, he didn't run a draft past the compound's public relations handlers, and he certainly did not ask for his father's patriarchal blessing. Instead, Jason bypassed the draconian PR lockdown completely, taking directly to his Instagram to issue a statement that sent cataclysmic shockwaves through the fandom and the mainstream media alike. He posted a stark, text-based message declaring that he and his wife Maddie were entirely disgusted by the allegations against Joseph, explicitly and fearlessly labeling his own brother's alleged actions as pure evil. He did not mince words. He did not hide behind the traditional, nauseatingly sweet Duggar vernacular of seeking grace or navigating a season of trials. He called it what it was, and in doing so, he drove a permanent, unremovable stake straight through the heart of the family's greatest defense mechanism, their unbreakable unity. Insider reports claim that the moment Jason hit publish on that Instagram story, the sheer panic that erupted at the main Duggar compound was unlike anything ever witnessed in the history of the family. Phones were allegedly ringing off the hook, text messages were flying in a frantic frenzy, and Jim Bob was reportedly caught in a terrifying state of disbelief, completely paralyzed by the realization that his iron-fisted grip on his sons had finally slipped. Exclusive theories circulating among deeply entrenched family insiders suggest that the hours leading up to Jason's explosive post were fraught with intense, behind-the-scenes warfare. It is rumored that Jim Bob had been actively organizing a family-wide digital blackout, demanding that all siblings surrender their social media passwords or face immediate financial excommunication. But Jason allegedly refused, choosing instead to barricade himself in his own home, physically separating himself from the toxic pressure cooker of the compound. According to these insider reports, Jason's wife Maddie played a pivotal, heroic role in this rebellion, laying down the ultimate ultimatum. They could either stand firmly on the side of the innocent victims, or they could go down with the sinking, rotting ship of the Duggar legacy. Faced with the reality of bringing his own future children into a family that actively shelters monsters, Jason made the unprecedented choice to burn the bridge while he was still standing on it. The sheer magnitude of this exposure cannot be overstated. By going public, Jason didn't just express a personal opinion. He handed the public, and potentially the prosecution, the ultimate validation of the charges. He dragged the darkest, most closely guarded family secrets out of the shadows and threw them into the glaring light of day, proving to the entire world that the sickness within the Duggar family was not an isolated incident, but a deeply ingrained, systemic horror that the younger generation was finally refusing to inherit. The scramble for damage control that immediately followed Jason's post was a spectacular, humiliating disaster for the IBLP loyalists. The old guard of the family instantly went into a blinding panic because Jason's outright condemnation completely destroyed their only remaining defensive strategy. For decades, whenever a Duggar faced a scandal, Jim Bob's go-to playbook was to heavily lean into the narrative of religious persecution. He would spin the story, painting his family as righteous, God-fearing martyrs who were simply being targeted by a wicked, secular world intent on tearing down their Christian values. He would cry, "Secular witch hunt," and the deeply indoctrinated followers of the Institute in Basic Life Principles would swallow it whole, rallying behind the family with their wallets and their prayers. But you absolutely cannot claim a secular witch hunt is taking place when the suspect's own aggressively conservative, fundamentalist Christian brother is practically cheering on the local police department. Jason's post single-handedly dismantled the persecution complex. The cognitive dissonance for the IBLP loyalists was shattering. Insider reports detail a chaotic emergency war room meeting at the Duggar house, where desperate attempts were allegedly made to draft a counterstatement claiming Jason's account had been hacked, or that he was acting under severe emotional distress and didn't mean what he said. Exclusive theories even suggest that Jim Bob's fixers frantically tried to reach out to Instagram to have Jason's account temporarily suspended, desperately trying to put the digital genie back in the bottle. But it was far too late. The screenshots had already been taken, the news articles had already been published, and the narrative had permanently slipped from Jim Bob's desperately grasping hands. The public saw the panic. They saw the internal division, and they realized that the righteous facade was crumbling in real time. This scramble to contain the narrative exposed the raw, ugly truth of the family dynamic. It wasn't about seeking justice for the alleged young victim. It was solely about protecting the brand, protecting the television royalties, and protecting Jim Bob's massive ego. Insider reports whisper of screaming matches echoing across the massive property lines of the compound, with older siblings allegedly being dispatched as emissaries to physically drive to Jason's house and demand he retract the statement. But Jason allegedly stood his ground, threatening to release even more damaging information if they did not leave his property immediately. Exclusive theories float the highly compelling idea that Jason has been quietly keeping a mental burn book for years, documenting every hushed conversation, every forced smile, and every swept under the rug incident that he was forced to witness as a child. The fear that Jason might just decide to sit down for an unfiltered, unedited, multi-hour podcast interview is reportedly keeping the old guard awake at night, sweating through their matching pajamas. The scramble is no longer just about saving Joseph from a lengthy prison sentence. It is about saving the entire patriarchal structure from total, absolute annihilation at the hands of one of their own creations. This brings us to the most devastating aspect of this entire saga: the absolute betrayal and permanent isolation of Joseph Duggar. In the twisted, deeply conditioned reality of the Duggar family, a brother turning his back on another brother is the ultimate, unforgivable sin. It is a betrayal of the highest order, a complete rejection of everything they were brainwashed to believe about family loyalty superseding all earthly laws. When Josh Duggar went down in flames, the family surrounded him with an impenetrable wall of forced grace, offering endless prayers for his troubled soul and actively campaigning for his redemption. But Jason offered absolutely none of that for Joseph. There were no requests for prayers, no mentions of seeking God's healing, and absolutely no room left for misinterpretation. Jason offered nothing but total, blistering condemnation. By labeling his brother's actions as evil, Jason effectively excommunicated Joseph from the only world he has ever known. He isolated Joseph entirely, leaving him to face the devastating reality of his alleged crimes completely alone, without the powerful, well-funded shield of the Duggar PR machine to hide behind. This hard line drawn in the sand is a massive, incredibly brave declaration from the younger generation. It sends an unmistakable, echoing message to the rest of the siblings and to the entire world. The era of silent complicity is officially over. Insider reports claim that Joseph, sitting in his holding cell, was completely shattered when he was informed of Jason's public statement, reportedly breaking down as he realized that the blind, unwavering support he had banked on was completely gone. Exclusive theories suggest that Jason's bravery has actually sparked a secret underground rebellion among the other younger siblings, who are allegedly forming a private alliance to legally and financially separate themselves from Jim Bob before the entire empire completely collapses under the weight of these federal charges. The betrayal isn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It is a permanent severing of ties, a courageous act of setting the record straight, and a definitive statement that blood is no longer thicker than the horrific truth of abuse. This brings us to the absolute ultimate irony of this entire devastating situation, a poetic justice so profoundly striking that you literally could not write a better script for the downfall of a reality television empire. For over 2 decades, Jim Bob Duggar spent every waking moment meticulously constructing a fortress of patriarchal power, ruthlessly forcing his children to act as the human shields for his incredibly lucrative brand. He spent years coercing his sons and daughters to swallow their trauma, to paste on massive, terrifyingly blank smiles, and to actively cover for the abusers within their own ranks, all under the guise of protecting the sacred Duggar family name. He taught them that the name was synonymous with godliness, with purity, and with a divine mandate to rule over the secular world. When the first horrific scandals involving Josh Duggar broke, Jim Bob successfully deployed this toxic conditioning, convincing his children that if they did not defend their brother, the secular media would destroy their ministry, their income, and their very souls. He demanded absolute complicity, and for a long time, he got it. But the ultimate irony that is currently tearing Jim Bob's world apart is that his own oppressive system has spectacularly backfired. His children have finally grown up. They have entered the real world, and they have come to a staggering, life-altering realization. They have realized that the Duggar name is no longer a shield. It is a highly radioactive curse. They have realized that Jim Bob's strategy of covering up for abusers didn't protect the family name at all. It completely, permanently destroyed it. And now, in a twist of fate that has left the IBLP old guard completely paralyzed with fear, the younger generation has figured out that the absolute only way to protect their own individual names, to protect their wives, and to protect their future children from being associated with a legacy of systemic predation is to loudly, aggressively, and publicly expose the abusers in their own family. They are using Jim Bob's own lessons in self-preservation against him. But instead of protecting the patriarchy, they are burning it to the ground to save themselves. Insider reports claim that this generational awakening has been the absolute worst-case scenario for Jim Bob, a man who believed his control was eternal. According to these explosive leaks, Jim Bob is currently trapped in a state of perpetually escalating rage, unable to comprehend how the very children he brainwashed to be his fiercely loyal foot soldiers have suddenly realized they hold all the power. Exclusive theories suggest that the younger brothers, led by Jason's unprecedented bravery, have held secret off-site meetings far away from the compound's prying eyes and hidden cameras, where they have actively discussed the horrifying reality of their inherited legacy. These exclusive theories propose that Jason and several of his siblings have completely accepted that the 19 Kids and Counting brand is not just dead, but completely rotting, and that any continued association with Jim Bob's cover-up machine will ruin their own independent businesses and social standing forever. They are allegedly terrified that if they do not draw a massive, undeniable public line in the sand right now, they will be eternally branded as abuse apologists, just like their parents. The survival instinct that Jim Bob instilled in them to protect the cult is now being used to systematically dismantle the cult. Insider reports paint a vivid, chilling picture of the current atmosphere inside the sprawling Duggar compound, describing it as a literal ghost town of paranoia and desperation. It is rumored that Jim Bob has been frantically pacing the halls, realizing that his ultimate weapon, the threat of public humiliation, has been completely neutralized because his children are no longer afraid of the public. They are afraid of him, and they are afraid of the monsters he continues to protect. By speaking out, Jason didn't just condemn Joseph, he completely indicted his father's entire worldview. He proved that the younger Duggars are no longer willing to sacrifice their own morality on the altar of Jim Bob's bank account. This is a monumental psychological shift. For years, the children were taught that leaving the family's protective umbrella would result in immediate destruction by the secular world. But Jason's Instagram post proved the exact opposite. When he spoke out, the secular world didn't destroy him, they applauded him. The public, the watchdog groups, and the former fans all rallied behind Jason's statement, offering him the kind of genuine validation and support that he never once received inside the cold, conditional walls of his father's house. This public reaction has allegedly sent shockwaves through the rest of the silent siblings. Exclusive theories floating around the darkest corners of the internet suggest that Jason's public rebellion was a highly calculated test balloon, a strategic move to see if life outside the Duggar machine was actually survivable. And the results have been overwhelmingly positive for Jason's personal reputation, even as it spells absolute doom for Jim Bob's empire. But this incredible bravery does not come without a terrifying, monumental cost. And this is where the reality of Jason's situation becomes incredibly dark and incredibly dangerous. We have to talk about the financial guillotine that is currently hanging by a thread over Jason Duggar's head. Jim Bob Duggar is not a man who accepts defeat, and he is certainly not a man who parts with his money or his control willingly. His sprawling empire of real estate, used car lots, commercial properties, and hidden trusts was meticulously designed to keep his children on a permanent financial leash. Insider reports claim that immediately following Jason's explosive Instagram statement condemning Joseph, Jim Bob immediately initiated a scorched earth financial retaliation protocol. Whispers from deeply embedded sources suggest that Jim Bob immediately contacted his team of lawyers to completely freeze Jason out of the family's overarching LLCs, allegedly attempting to instantly revoke Jason's access to properties he was actively flipping and developing. Exclusive theories even go so far as to suggest that Jim Bob is currently attempting to rewrite his massive will and estate plan, explicitly writing Jason and his wife Maddie completely out of any future inheritance, treating them as dead to the family in the eyes of the patriarchal structure. The threat is clear, brutal, and entirely financial. If you cross the family, you will be left with absolutely nothing. Imagine the sheer terror of that reality. Jason was raised with a completely stunted education, deliberately kept away from accredited secular universities, and trained only to work within the closed ecosystem of his father's businesses. He was systematically financially crippled from birth, designed to be entirely dependent on the Duggar bank account for his housing, his income, and his survival. To stand up and publicly declare war on the man who holds the keys to your entire financial existence is an act of defiance that is almost impossible to fully comprehend. Insider reports allege that Jim Bob has been sending aggressive, manipulative text messages to the other siblings, using Jason as a terrifying cautionary tale, warning them that anyone who offers Jason so much as a dime of support will face the exact same immediate financial excommunication. He is reportedly trying to starve Jason out, banking on the idea that once the secular applause fades, Jason will come crawling back to the compound, begging for a job at the car lot, and willing to retract his statement. But exclusive theories strongly suggest that Jason anticipated this exact incredibly toxic maneuver. Rumors are aggressively swirling that Jason has been quietly siphoning his own legitimately earned money into completely separate, secret secular bank accounts for years, specifically preparing for the day he would need to make his great escape. There are even insider reports suggesting that Jason might be in quiet, heavily guarded talks with secular public relations firms and major publishing houses, realizing that telling his unfiltered, horrifying story of growing up in the ultimate cult of cover-ups could completely secure his financial independence forever. If Jim Bob cuts off the family money, Jason might just decide to make his own millions by completely exposing every single skeleton left in the Duggar family closet. And that is the ultimate nightmare that is keeping Jim Bob awake at night. The entire foundation of the 19 Kids and Counting legacy has completely crumbled to dust, blowing away in the wind of federal charges, internal mutiny, and unprecedented public exposure. We are witnessing the real-time, spectacularly messy collapse of a highly abusive dynasty that thought it was completely untouchable. Jason Duggar going rogue is not just a minor family spat. It is the final, fatal blow to a deeply corrupt system that has destroyed countless lives under the guise of religion. It is a defining moment in reality television history, a moment where the heavily edited, perfectly lit facade was violently ripped away to reveal the agonizing, dark truth hiding just behind the cameras. The older generation's sins have finally caught up with them, and the younger generation is utterly refusing to pay the bill. So now I have to turn this over to you, because your voice and your engagement are absolutely critical in keeping the pressure on these deeply toxic family dynamics. We have unpacked the history, the lies, the cover-ups, and the ultimate shocking betrayal. We have looked at the insider reports of Jim Bob's financial retaliation and the exclusive theories about Jason's secret preparations for war. But the most important question remains entirely unanswered, and I need to know exactly what you think about this explosive situation. Is Jason Duggar risking being completely, permanently cut off from Jim Bob's massive piles of money for speaking out against his own brother? Do you think he has a secret financial safety net? Or is he walking blindly into total financial ruin just to do the right thing? And most importantly, do you respect his incredibly bold statement? Or do you think there is more to this story that the public isn't seeing yet? Sound off in the comments right now. I read every single one of your thoughts, and your theories are what fuel this channel. If you were blown away by this deep dive into the absolute collapse of the Duggar empire, you absolutely must hit that like button to push this video out to everyone who needs to see the truth. And subscribe to the channel so you never miss another exclusive update on this massive unfolding scandal. The Duggar Civil War has officially begun, and we are going to be here documenting every single shocking twist and turn. Drop your theories in the comments below, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next deep dive.